Hello, welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Ari Hirschberg, Community Practice Lead at the Exchange Lab. I am talking with Dai Vaughan, co-founder of the UK Government Digital, to continue the conversation from the Digital VC livestream with Jill Carruthers on Legacy Modernization Part 1, The Value of Data. During the livestream, I moderate Slido. This was particularly a fun one to watch because the three statements by Dai have heavily resonated with our audience, and I expect that they will become sound bites over time. They were, technology is not the problem. It can be easily fixed. It's culture around commission and maintenance that causes trouble. Changing, rethinking, reorganizing, all points to how legacy leadership is the real root of the problem, not legacy systems, and funding teams, not projects. We've had 731 people view the live stream and have received many questions. I am happy to be able to go a bit further with Dai this morning. So welcome, Dai. Thanks for being on the podcast. In the live stream, you talked about the idea of funding teams rather than projects, which challenges the entire project-based funding model. Can you share in more detail, like what are the benefits and what the change management process looks like?
Absolutely. One of the big problems with projects is their short-term nature. Projects are there to deliver a particular thing, and then they get closed down, and ongoing maintenance gets handed over to BAU, anything that needs to happen to technology or to systems after that gets slotted in alongside everything else, or they have to wait for the next big capital investment that comes along in a couple of years' time, which it means that technology starts to rot. It starts to get difficult to look after. It means that it needs those regular big capital investments to replace them and upgrade them, and it leads to toxic legacy tech. Now, I often talk about changing that approach and using teams, long-running teams, to look after services rather than project funding. And the reason for that is that if you start to fund long-running teams that have responsibility for services, they can they can maintain that service on a regular basis. They can keep it going. They can keep adding new features and making changes to it as needs change. By having the sort of long-running teams, you also keep the knowledge in the team, so you have a good understanding of that piece of software or those pieces of software that manage that service, and you don't lose it by handing it over to sort of BAU teams to look after. Those long-running teams can keep operating that service and making changes and improvements. They can continue to invest in it over time. They can make sure the technology is kept up to date. And when something unexpected comes along, like a new government or a new minister with different priorities, or some global event that changes the way we need to think and do things, those teams already have the knowledge about exactly how everything works because they've been looking after it for a long period of time. They're able to make changes quickly because they're already set up to do that and they're doing it on a daily basis. So by having those sort of long-running teams, it's much easier to maintain technology and systems and to deliver services much quicker, much cheaper, much simpler, and it avoids the rotting of technology that happens normally. But of course, that needs a different way of thinking about funding and lots of other things like that to make that work.
Two thoughts on that. First, can you describe what BAU means?
So traditionally, when we talk about technology, or when in traditional sort of technology management, what we tend to do is we have a project team that builds a piece of software or configures a piece of software or sets up a system to do something, and at the end of that project, that piece of software gets handed over to another team or to a group that looks after it and maintains it, and that maintenance is normally just dealing with errors that crop up, or occasionally applying patches. But generally, it's just there to sort of just keep stuff ticking over, and that's usually referred to sort of as a business as usual. The problem with technology is it's not. You can't just do the bare minimum like that. You have to continually change and alter it. So BAU is just not good enough.
Okay, and then my other thought on that is when you say like a team should be there for a long time, is there anything that are key aspects of this team?
So when we talk about teams being there for a long time, ideally what we're talking about is multidisciplinary teams. So we're people who understand the policy, so the reason why that service is there. They're people who understand the technology that underpins that service. So possibly developers, designers, infrastructure engineers, people who are there looking after that service and understand how everything works. And they're there to be able to make changes to it and to continually improve it as users' experience and users' understanding changes, as new policy gets developed, as new governments come in and change priorities. That team should be a multidisciplinary team that understands all the aspects of that service and can change it and improve it all the time.
What are your top 3 reasons to fund a team and not a project?
So top 3 reasons, I think. The first of which is knowledge. When you deal with projects, what tends to happen at the end of a project is there's a lengthy handover process where those systems that got built or system that got built gets handed over to the operational team. I mean, lots of people who are involved in making the decisions about why something was built a particular way or how it got built move on to do other projects or move on to other roles, and a lot of knowledge is lost. When we talk about long-running teams, the people who made those decisions, the people who built the service, understand the most about it, keep there and keep operating it. So when it comes to making changes, they already have the knowledge to be able to do that. And related to that, the second reason is that you can build up momentum really quickly because the people have the knowledge and are making changes to it on a daily basis or making regular changes and adding improvements. They already have a lot of that information to be able to make changes quickly. And so you gain quite a lot of momentum by having those long-running teams, which means you can make changes faster, you can make changes quicker. And the third reason is you stop developing legacy technology. Your technology has a team there looking after it on a day-to-day basis. They're making improvements. They're constantly making it better. And so it doesn't slide into that toxic legacy mess that you find that a lot of technology sits in at the moment. And by having those long-running teams, you get all those benefits of lack of legacy technology.
I would also think that the trust of the team is so strong as they grow that that also helps their efficiency and their speed.
Absolutely. Once if you've got a team that is there looking after a product, they can start to build that trust with each other. When we don't often talk about the cost of setting up new teams. And whenever a new team forms, you have that the sort of process of storming, norming, forming that people talk about. So, teams have to get to know how each other works. They have to understand ways in which idiosyncrasies that people have. They have to understand how people like things to work, and develop routines and patterns with each other. And that takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. And every time you start up a project, the beginning of your project is all about creating that and setting that up and do it and going through that painful period of the team forming. If you have a long running team, you don't have that. You've had it once that every time you come to make a change, that team's been together for a while. They have that understanding, they have that trust, they know how each other works. Now, you're always going to have a little bit of disruption because people will leave, people will move on to other things. But you're reducing that down to when individuals move on rather than the whole team and having to restart an entire team. So you can still get a lot of efficiencies from that, and you build up a lot of trust with teams.
Thank you. Can you share some examples of how working in the open or other digital principles have been applied in a real context?
Absolutely. I mean, one of my favourite examples from the last 2 years has been some of the work that's been happening in the state of California. There's a very small team in the state of California that started out building a new website for the state of California. And they talked they worked in the open from the beginning, regularly talking and blogging about the work they're doing. They did a lot of user research and talked about what they were learning as part of that. And they were just starting going. They developed the alpha of a new website and got that published. And just as they did that, COVID hit, and that team pivoted really, really quickly to focusing on providing really high quality, easy, simple advice and guidance to the citizens of California on what they needed to do in face of an unprecedented event. And that team continued their efforts of working in the open and talking about how they were producing that advice and getting that advice out there and managing that advice to citizens. And they found very quickly that built up a lot of trust with other bits of government and other agencies and organizations, and found that people were coming to them to say, how do I get this advice? I've got this thing is affecting my service. How can I get this advice published? And so they continued their working in the open to develop what they called the crisis standard, which was a guide for how people could work with them during this crisis. And that crisis guide is published online. And I know other organisations have taken that crisis guide and used that for the work they're doing. So that principle of working in the open has helped lots of bits of government and lots of governments around the world and organisations around the world deal with what has been an unprecedented situation. Of course, that some of those things that California did have come from some of the work that was done originally in the UK, and I'm quite biased, having been involved in the setup of GDS. But I think GDS, the Government Digital Service in the UK, talks a lot about working in the open, and that was elements of blogging continually about the work they're doing and showing the work that they're doing and sharing lessons via blogs, whether that's publishing code and showing the code that they're working on. Or whether that's going to other events or talking to other individuals about the work they're doing and sharing it all openly. Lots of what GDS has produced over the last decade now has been taken and reused in many other contexts. So there's services like gov.uk Notify, which is a tool that lets you send text messages and SMS messages and emails to citizens really easily. And that code that GDS wrote and shared in the open is now in use in Canada, in Australia, in the US to help build really easy digital services. And those have been taken in many different places and used in many different organisations now. Some of the GDS design patterns are in use in private sector, so it's gone well beyond governments and into the private sector. And occasionally, I'll come across a company that has borrowed some of the GDS design patterns because they work. And so that sharing in the open and working in the open has really helped improve digital services across the world and both in public and private sector, and it's really, really good to see that happening.
I'm a big public digital fan. Your work is like a mirror of what we're all trying to do, and being in the open is crucial. Back to the word trust again. It just how have you noticed that it's helped the public?
So working in the open is an interesting idea. It's the antithesis of a lot of communications. So government is quite often controlled about how it communicates to the public, and most people who work in government communications will recognise terms such as communications grids and press releases and so on. And working in the open is almost the exact opposite of that. One of the things that we find quite often is by talking about the work that we're doing regularly, when something goes wrong, because something will always go wrong at some point, that people are much more likely to give you the benefit of a doubt than if you sort of hidden it away and not talked about it. So quite often, we've seen in the past where there have been big outages of government services and something has gone wrong, but because we've been open and we've talked about the problems we've had or the way we face those problems, people are much more likely to sort of trust that we're doing the right thing and that we're not doing something for bad, or we're not just being difficult. And that working in the open, I think, really helps build up that trust with citizens, with other technologists, with other governments, and it's definitely a pattern that we've repeated across the world, and it helps a lot.
Thanks for explaining that a little bit. There aren't incentives in the system to do the right thing, but a lot of risk if we fail. So how do we overcome this risk aversion?
I think one of the ways in which you can deal with risk is actually turn it around and use it to your benefit. When we talk about projects and when we work with projects, it's often triggered by a business case that says something like, we'll guarantee that we're going to deliver these benefits for this money over this time. And that is almost always a false certainty. It'll cost something will cost more, or it'll take longer, or it doesn't quite deliver the benefits, or some combination of all of the above. Now, if we were to talk about risk properly, what we'd really say is the things in that business case are all guesses. We don't really know how much it'll cost. It's just a guess. And if we start talking about how to manage that risk, the best way of managing the risk of uncertainty is to break the delivery down into smaller pieces, to deliver small increments quickly, prove it works, and then deliver the next increment. If something goes wrong with a smaller delivery, then that's much less of a problem. We've wasted less time, or we've wasted less money. We can reprioritize and we can pivot, learn from that mistake, and continue. So we quite often talk about projects being very risky, but actually we're talking about the wrong risks. We're talking about we're not talking about the fact that the business cases that we're producing or the big project plans are best guesses. And actually, the best way of managing the risk of those best guesses is to break it into smaller pieces. So whenever anyone talks to me about, oh, this thing is risky, I say, well, why don't we bake it? Well, let's try and reduce the risk, and by producing smaller increments, smaller packages, smaller pieces of work that we deliver quickly, we can mitigate those risks. Particularly in government, if we're working in government, inevitably circumstances change. So a new administration or a new minister might have new priorities, or something crops up which changes what we need to do. If we're working in small incremental pieces, we can change and pivot our direction quickly and respond to those. So by working iteratively and in a more agile way, we can respond to those changes without putting a big project, without affecting a big project. We can respond to those types of changes and reduce the risk of those things happening. So actually, when we talk about agile and delivering in an iterative way, we're reducing the risk. And I use the language of risk to sort of explain that.
Do you have any stories of doing small incremental changes where things possibly weren't working and you kind of built the confidence of your user by communicating and making it better?
So, I mean, there's a couple of examples I could use, and actually one of my favourites is from what's probably some of the early days of delivering the gov.uk website, which is the main website for UK government. When we were delivering that, we released a feature that effectively let you look and see services that were delivered by other bits of government, by what we call local government, but probably municipal is an equivalent to in British Columbia. And we did it. We got the logic wrong. We made a mistake on that. We didn't quite understand some of the complexities around local government. But we were able to, because we were working in the open. We'd explain what we were doing. We explained the problem that we had, But we were fixing it. And a week or so later, we were able to ship a new version of that service that fixed some of that logic. Another example from a couple of years ago was when I was doing work at the Driver and Vehicle Licensing Agency in the UK, and we were developing a new version of a service that lets you pay for your car tax, which is a fee that we have on all vehicles in the UK. And we started out by releasing a new version of a service which dealt with the majority of vehicles. It didn't handle a lot of edge cases, but it handled the common case. And then over time, we released new features to that to handle each edge case. But what we started with was we started only directing a portion of traffic to that new service. So we only took, say, 5% of car tax renewals to begin with. We made sure that the service was working, that the error rates were roughly where we wanted them to be, that things were working in the way we thought they should work. And after a week or so, we increased it to 10% of transactions, and then 20%, and then 40%, and then finally we released that to everybody. But that element of incremental release and slowly building that up allowed us to gain confidence that what we'd built was working. And then over time, we added new features like allowing you to pay for your car tax in smaller increments, or removing certain checks that were causing lots of failures, or redesigning a bit of a service that didn't make sense. But that incremental improvement and incremental changes reduced the risk of a big bang project. And we could have just put it online and turned the old one off, but the risk was quite large there that something would go wrong. So that small release built confidence and helped us understand that the thing we were building was working.
So how can we connect teams and bring folks together to strengthen our products rather than build and maintain in isolation?
So this to me comes down to multidisciplinary teams and having teams of lots of different skills working together on one service. So I quite often talk about teams of lots of different skills. So product managers, policy people, developers and designers all working together on one service. When I talk about funding teams, not projects, it's those kind of teams that I'm talking about. So you have the people in that team who understand the policy, who will work on the policy. You have the developers that are building the service. You have the designers, or you have the infrastructure engineers who understand how that service works. And by having those people together, working on the service together, they all understand all the bits of it. So the developers gain an understanding of the policy. The policy teams gain an understanding of the technical effort needed to make this service work, and that shared understanding helps you deliver a much better service. And then that's the thing that I haven't mentioned is like user research and making sure that you're involving the end user in the service. There's no point in building a service and not involving your end user. So having user research in there, in your team on a day-to-day basis, make sure that the service that you're building meets the needs of your users, and you gain that understanding of what your users are after. So that those strong, long-running, multidisciplinary teams that look after services are there to help you deliver services better and deliver a better thing for end users.
Can you speak to the complexity of government, how to evolve tech approach or culture across ministries?
Yeah, so government is inevitably complex and difficult, and there's always a mixture of ministries and agencies and departments and all sorts of different issues. When we set up the UK Government Digital Service, that was a case of government digital service sat in one bit of government, but there's 24 government departments in the UK and 300 government agencies. Trying to sort of evolve the way government approach technology is not a simple process. But what we started with a whole bunch of different ways of doing it. So started out with things like demonstrating what good looks like. So a lot about working in the open that I was talking about earlier on is a really good way of demonstrating what good looks like. And once you start to show what good looks like, you can use that to encourage other bits of government to follow suit. There's also then techniques like service standards or spend controls, which you can use to help try and act as a bit of a forcing function to force other bits of government to follow particular ways. On the other side, there's also things like tools which help bits of government deliver stuff better. So one of the things that we did in the UK was we developed a set of tools to help you prototype and build services quickly. And those tools were available for free for all other bits of government to pick up and use. And that encouraged other bits of government to use those rather than anything else, because they were there and available for them. And so you kind of have those two bits of sort of carrot and stick, and the tools to help you build services quicker, the carrot, and then the spend controls and the service standards are the stick. But with the two working hand in hand, you can start to evolve that technology approach. The third piece of this puzzle is then communities of practice. So it's things like this podcast, or getting groups together that are interested in particular topics. So we quite often ran events for technologists, or for product managers, or for content designers across government, to bring them together so that they could share their understanding of what was going on around government, and start to evolve their approach together. So if the UK government, they used to run an event called Content Camp, which was available for all content designers to get together to talk about content. And we used to run various technology events that were similar, for bringing technologists together to help them understand different ways of doing things and talk about common problems. Because inevitably, although government is complex, spread across lots of different agencies, a lot of us are doing very, very similar things. And there's a lot we can learn from each other. And a problem that we might have solved in Department A is probably still causing problems in Department C. And by sharing that knowledge, you can evolve your approach.
What I like about those, because we utilize that as well, like we have guilds and communities of practice, is that it creates community. And it also is even fun while you're building things, even though everyone's working on different products. It builds this this really neat community that's actually enjoying hearing about other stuff and doing this soft mentorship along the way, as we all improve our products.
Absolutely, and I mean one of the things that I found most successful in the UK was this was not done officially. This just evolved over time. We had a Slack instance called UK Government Digital, and it started out as a couple of people in a couple of departments were on there talking about particular problems. And over time, more and more people from more and more departments got added to that, and channels sprung up. We're talking about content design or user research, or how we had channels looking at how do you collect citizen information, or how do you handle tax information, or how do you handle vehicle information, or how do you deal with this particular piece of technology. And these channels sprung up, and more and more people joined, and it just evolved over time as being this great community where people could come together and talk about issues and share things they were learning. And that was not an official thing that happened. It was it just built up over time. But there are many other examples in the UK and abroad where that sort of thing has really helped bring civil servants together to help deliver really good quality digital services. And it's something that I find is incredibly useful whenever I go anywhere, is to start to encourage them to develop these communities and to build them up to help share knowledge and learn from each other.
Last question. Any great examples of teams who not only tackle development of new services, but also change policy? Some systems are constrained by dated policy.
Absolutely. I think policy change is a fundamental part of delivering delivering good digital services. There's inevitably systems, particularly the legacy systems that we were talking about in the live stream, all have some element of sort of restrictions around policy. They were built to meet a particular policy, and now that policy might be looking different. There are various examples in a couple of places where teams work directly with policy to make those changes. There's a service in the UK related to vehicle license plates, and the UK policy around that was really complex and really difficult when we started, and we had the team that we had working on that had the policy team embedded within them. So you had developers and you had designers and you had a product manager and you had the policy person in that team. And as part of that process of delivering a new digital service to do this transaction online, we actually changed the legislation in order to make it simpler. So we adapted the policy to change the way you handle license plates so that it was simpler and easier. Similarly, the example I used earlier on about car tax, that the policy changed at the same time as we were delivering a new digital service, so that we could remove some of the barriers to doing online transactions and digital transactions. Having policy teams embedded within your technology or digital or products long running product team is a really important part of the process. Policy divorced from service delivery is a large cause of problems that you tend to find. So I always recommend that you try and get your policy team to be in the long running service team that is going to look after your service.
So do you have any final thoughts to share?
I think that one big problem with legacy technology is there's an enormous amount of it, and we've built this up over decades now, and unless we start thinking about how we change our practices around building and maintaining services, we are just going to keep adding to the pile. So the more we keep doing the same things over and over again, the more likely it is that in 5, 6, 7 years time from now, we're going to be having exactly the same conversation about how we deal with the technology that got implemented in 2021, 2022. And we're just adding to the pile of legacy technology. So changing how we approach our funding models, changing how we approach our projects, things like focusing on teams, talking about what we're doing and sharing our learnings more, those things are going to help us start to break this cycle and deliver technology that is going to be sustainable, is going to meet the needs of users, and is going to allow us to change quickly as user expectations change and as things around us change. And unless we do that, we're just inviting disaster after disaster after disaster over the next couple of years.
Thank you. Great interview. Really appreciate your time, Dai. So thanks for everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed the Legacy Modernization Part 1, the value of data. I would love to hear your feedback, comments, and suggestions. You can connect with me at ri.hirschberg@gov.bc.ca or click the link in the show notes. Thanks for listening.